The public life of Daniel O'Connell is well known, his oratory and activism and political victories. But what about his interior life and the story of his soul? That's less well known and very interesting indeed. We're here in Derrynane House, the country residence of O'Connell and his family at the height of his career. This was his base when he was elected MP for Clare, for example, in 1828, an election which forced the British government to remove the barriers to Catholics taking up seats in Parliament. This victory, known as Catholic Emancipation, was a goal towards which O'Connell had been working with all his powerful personality for 2 decades. For himself, it opened the door to a role in the great theatre of the House of Commons, where his rhetorical skills and persistent campaigning became legendary. Famously, he laboured, unsuccessfully in the end, to repeal the Act of Union and to establish a parliament in Ireland. But he had many other political passions too. He spoke powerfully in favour of Jewish emancipation and increasing the participation of women in political life, and against slavery, taking up quite radical positions in these debates. Among those who listened to O'Connell speaking in Parliament was a certain Monsignor Pecci, who went on to become Pope Leo XIII, and Charles Dickens, who would apparently drop his pencil often when O'Connell was speaking, since he could no longer hold back his tears. So that was public O'Connell, the liberator, the uncrowned King of Ireland, the pioneer of non-violent resistance. What about his interior life? What about his religious beliefs and his life of prayer? For a long time, I assumed O'Connell was straightforwardly Catholic all his life. I knew he had been educated in Catholic schools in the continent, that he was an active member of the Catholic Association, that he led the campaign for Catholic Emancipation. That all sounds pretty Catholic. But no, for a long time, O'Connell was not a believer. As a young man in France and later in London, when he was training to be a barrister, he began to read widely in writers who were openly skeptical about the claims of Christianity. Writers like Voltaire and Godwin and the historian Gibbon, and above all, Thomas Paine. At the age of 21, O'Connell read Paine's book, The Age of Reason, which advocated the abandonment of Christian dogmas and the adoption of deism, belief in the God of nature, the God of the philosophers, an impersonal force who maintained harmony in the universe from a distance. In his diary, young Daniel wrote, "This work gave me a great deal of pleasure. He has presented many things to my sight in a point of view in which I never before beheld them." This was a major turning point for O'Connell, and in his diary he progressively shakes off the faith of his childhood in favour of the ideals of the Enlightenment: liberty, equality, fraternity, and the rejection of the Church and her superstitions. He referred to God in his diary now only as the first cause and the Great Spirit. He begins to doubt the immortality of the soul. He praises the Roman Emperor Julian, who had rejected Christianity and restored pagan worship. He calls him Julian the Great. He even joined the Freemasons and became master of a lodge of Masons. He was still politically Catholic. Catholics were his tribe, but he wasn't going to Mass or confession, and he wasn't praying. Something happens in 1802, though, that marks another turning point in O'Connell's spiritual odyssey. He gets married. His wife, Mary O'Connell, was a distant cousin of his, with whom he had fallen in love 2 years earlier. Her father was actually a member of the Church of Ireland, but her mother was Catholic, and she herself was a devout, prayerful Catholic. Their marriage was celebrated by a Catholic priest at her request. It was a secret wedding though, since Mary was from an impoverished branch of the family. Daniel was marrying down, and he knew his close family would be seriously displeased with his marrying a dowerless bride, and indeed they were. Still, the marriage was a very happy one. When Daniel was away, Mary would write to him, and she wasn't afraid in those letters to express her faith. She often promises her prayers for him, but of course Daniel couldn't reciprocate at that stage. In one very revealing letter to her, when she was very sick, a year into their marriage, he wrote, "Mary, sweet Mary, I cannot live without you. You are my life, my comfort. If I were a religionist, he says, I should spend every moment in praying for you. And this miserable philosophy, which I have taken up and been proud of, in place of religion, gives me now no consolation in my misery. So he's not praying for his wife, but he seems to wish that he could. In later letters, when O'Connell has actually reluctantly begun to attend the liturgy again, he refers jokingly to the sermons that Mary sends him. On one occasion, she writes to remind him not to eat meat during Holy Week and to go to prayer on Good Friday. Even the judges will have a day off that day, she says. And she goes on, "You see, heart, how good I want you to be." He replied, "I got your sermon last night, and I am condemned to catfish, nothing but fish, for more than a week." By 1815, O'Connell's faith seems to have deepened further. One factor in this may have been his profound remorse over the killing of an opponent in a duel. This moment haunted him and is likely to have led him to more sustained conversation with his God, not just the God of nature, but the God of justice and mercy, the Saviour. Now, for the first time, he took on a spiritual director, a Carmelite. He began to observe the Lenten fast, and his days of Freemasonry were long gone. Progressively from this point, O'Connell became more confidently Catholic in his convictions, defending transubstantiation in debates with Protestants, for example. He remained a figure of the left, inspired by Enlightenment ideals, but he was actively synthesizing these ideals with his Catholic convictions and practices. His opposition to the death penalty and to slavery and to support of rights for Jews was consistent, O'Connell was convinced, with his devotion to the sacraments and personal prayer and the papacy. More controversially, he favoured a clear separation between church and state, but he no longer did so out of opposition to the church. He thought that it would lead, in fact, to a healthier church as well as a healthier state. In all this, O'Connell was allied with the movement known across Europe as liberal Catholicism, which sought to renew the church with the best of modern political and social thought. He was seen within this movement as a leader and a pioneer. The whole example of his life and work was praised in the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris by one of the spokesmen of this movement, the Dominican friar Lacordaire. And Leo XIII, a great admirer of O'Connell, would adopt in his own social encyclicals many of the concerns of revolutionaries as the Church's own concerns. For the last 10 years of his life, Daniel O'Connell laboured without the support of his beloved wife, who had died in 1836. In her absence, his faith was only strengthened. He went on retreat to the Cistercian Abbey of Mount Melleray, and there he wrote down some new spiritual commitments: to pray the Memorare every day, to spend half an hour in meditation each day, and so on. He began to attend daily Mass. He was seen by all of his adoring fans praying the Rosary, going to confession, receiving communion. This faith nourished him right to the end. And as he lay dying in Genoa in 1847, he asked that his body be brought back to Ireland and his heart to Rome as a pilgrim. His mortal remains may have been separated in this way, but his life was really one of synthesis. The synthesis of political ideals with political skill, the synthesis of national concerns and international concerns, and the synthesis of faith and freedom. But all of this was made possible by a life of devotion, rebuilt from the ruins by the love of his wife, Mary.